Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that puts leadership in the limelight. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even Ben Stokes. Not that I would be able to get a question, or indeed anything else, past him. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We learn about why the Welsh valleys are seeing a biotech boom, to what extra resources our surgeons need in their operating rooms, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Blunkett, the former Home Secretary, former Education Secretary, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Mark Nind, the Managing Director of RJB Financial Services. Mark bought the firm that became RBJ when its original owner moved towards retirement. Now a team of 4, the firm provides around 200 clients across Lincolnshire with advice. We'll be discussing the business, the challenges it and the market is facing as things stand, and what can be done to improve standards within the sector looking forward, especially in regards to education. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a few months since RJB have been in the review. What I think the listeners would love to know, what's the firm been up to since?
It's been very much business as usual, really, and nothing dramatic has changed. Still remain incredibly busy.
Excellent.
Yes.
Good. And I mean, RJB itself has been going since 2001, but of course you bought the firm now over 10 years ago in 2006, was it?
Yes.
Excellent. Now, at the time, and my golly, hasn't the market changed so much in those years? At the time, what were your ambitions and aims for the firm, and have they been realised?
I would say they have, yes. I mean, it was just to grow and effectively become more of an advisory firm rather than a sales firm. And in some respects, the legislation has helped with that, because I think the regulator has felt that in the past that there was too much emphasis on selling products rather than advising clients. So to a certain extent, we've adapted to that prior to the legislation, but that has been the direction of travel anyway with the legislation as well.
And 2006 may have been a fine year, but it wasn't too long later that a certain financial hiccup occurred. How was that weathered?
It was. We were quite fortunate in some respects, because at the time, we were a relatively new company as such for that, and so effectively, a lot of the business was built on the back of group personal pensions. So, although people did suffer, as it were, it was either a case of being the pension or not. So that helped in some ways, because a lot of the business was on group pensions. It wasn't a case of somebody investing, say, a sum of money, then getting a bit spooked by the market and wanting to come out. With pensions, it wasn't that straightforward. So we were quite protected at that at the time, but I'm not saying it was an easy period, because it wasn't.
Absolutely. But certainly you came through it and have come out very stronger than ever, really. And I know that obviously you've now become authorised by the FCA. That must. How's that change in status affected the company? I imagine there might be a bit more paperwork now.
There is a bit more paperwork. Yeah. I mean, I think it was a better option for us, because one of the things is, with regards to not being directly authorised, is you're subject to the interpretation of the appropriate compliance regime. And with compliance, it's a case of making sure that, I don't say this really, the worst common denominator is looked after. So
Absolutely.
sometimes that can be a little frustrating. So being directly authorised, there's no real problem with that, because effectively you're then responsible for yourself. And so any compliance expertise that you sign up for or buy into, they're working for you, as it were, rather than working for themselves, if that makes any sense.
Oh, no, it certainly does. And I think some firms may well be a little bit apprehensive about the change in status at first, and for good reason perhaps. But as you've demonstrated and just said, the unique strengths that come with it can be exploited and should be. And I mean, I know that we probably shouldn't avoid the topic either, actually, of GDPR. That's all, Dan, how did you find that?
I found it, to be perfectly honest, an unnecessary administrative burden. I mean, there was one or two things I found out about it. I mean, again, well-intentioned, the ideas are good, and I can see that so we with a lot of advice and help, we had our own privacy document. But in reality, from a client's point of view, it's a lot more paperwork again. So they understand the intentions behind GDPR. So what it can end up being is just another form to be completed. And it was quite interesting, actually, because I've heard this. I don't know. The compliance people we use said that they went to the Information Commissioner and asked if the privacy document could be part of the client agreement. And the answer was no, because clients don't tend to read the client agreement. But to be honest, I don't see any appetite for reading the privacy document any more or any less than the client agreement, if you understand me. So,
absolutely.
So it did seem another extra layer of burden. So now what we did was, with existing clients on review, we let them know about our privacy document and got their signatures to the new privacy document, and explained that we don't share our information with third parties other than the companies that they're with. So, for instance, if they're with Prudential, we'd share it with Prudential. So change of address, that sort of thing. Any update in the records. But now, for new clients, it's just another documentation that they complete. And, like I say, well-intentioned. I can understand the logic behind it.
So many things are.
Yes.
But doesn't always tend to work out that way.
I don't think so. I have strong doubts over what was intended is worth the extra paperwork involved. But there we go.
I think there's certainly going to be some, and you've certainly highlighted some there, Mark. Yeah. There's going to be some key lessons, not just for the regulators, but I think I know this was originally an EU directive, obviously, but I don't know whether they'll pay attention or not. But it's something that when it comes to writing laws like this, I think there has to be a lot more consideration for how they're actually going to be implemented.
Well, definitely. I mean, one thing that the regulator and maybe the Information Commissioner in this situation, that I think sometimes they believe that the more information that a client has, the better informed they'll be. But they can get to a situation where it's information overload, and what they want to happen doesn't happen, because they think, just tell me where I need to sign and we'll get that one out of the way. So yes, I do think that's the case.
We have seen some solid results in some respects. I think it was the Information Commission. They've fined British Airways almost £200 million and Marriott, I think, over £100 million. So it's good to see. I suppose there is some form that at some level there is some working enforcement of it to an extent. But when it comes to what you've mentioned, I think the question's still out there, and I suppose time will tell.
And the other thing is, if you do have people who, if you like, don't sign up to the principles of GDPR, who still want to cold call people, it's not going to stop that happening.
Exactly.
Okay, there's an audit trail, and you can try and find out who's doing this, but the unscrupulous people will still not comply.
Yes, absolutely. But now, with that in mind, actually, thinking of the sector more broadly, Mark, what would you say at the moment are the challenges it's facing in the medium term?
This is the sector. I'd say pricing clients out of the market is the biggest
really
one. Yeah. So there could be a group of people who are going to struggle to find financial advice, and there are one or two ideas set up, like PensionWise, designed to offer free guidance. But there is a bit of a difference between guidance and advice, and I do think that's a bit of a problem. So, for instance, if you get somebody who wants to do something, and we would say advise against it, for instance, just say, like, I want to take everything out of my pension. We would advise people against that and be duty bound to do so. If they still wanted to do that, then I think our view is, well, if you're not going to follow the advice, I don't want to really get involved because I've done my bit. So then you sort of direct them to, say, the providers to then go through it, and then they have the process which is non-advised. So the end result is that they do something that they perhaps shouldn't be doing because they want to and know they can do it, but nobody's really preventing them from doing it.
And do you think this is, and I hear this sometimes from those at your end of things, it's perhaps a lack of education?
Oh, most definitely. Definitely. I mean, there's one thing that I've been looking at on behavioural psychology. It's like an immediate needs bias. So in other words, well, we want this. We don't know how we're going to get it. Oh, pensions, that's a good way of doing it. Well, there's going to be a lot of tax and you're going to mess up your retirement. Yeah, but we'll worry about that later. Lack of education is definitely one.
And I really think there could be an argument, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, Mark, of that education really can't start early enough.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think there needs to be at some point in even primary school, certainly at secondary school, where there are practical classes about managing money.
No, agreed. I don't think it can start soon enough. And certainly, it's difficult to get it off parents, because if the parents are of that mindset anyway, it's just going to carry on and on and on.
There's children from families that have parents that are probably sensible with money may not need the classes. Hopefully that's something. So if you were, so maybe this is an unfair question, but it's maybe a fun one. If you were Chancellor for the day, maybe just a couple of hours after lunch, you had a magic wand, what is it you would do? What is it you'd implement to go on?
Oh, that's difficult. The Chancellor's got a real difficult job. I mean, if I take freedom of pensions, I should imagine the Chancellor's got extra monies in his coffers that he wouldn't have had otherwise. Now, maybe that's a result for the Chancellor of the Exchequer. But, so it's just... if their objective is to get as much revenue in for the company to balance the books, then probably carry on as we are doing. If it's a different objective, well, no, that's going to be difficult for me to say, really.
No, absolutely. Now, also another pertinent issue is probably the actual retirement age itself.
Yes.
I think it's inevitable that it may well have to in the future go up at a faster rate than it is now. How do you see that working?
I think I've got no issue with that. I mean, I know people are living longer, and so when we look at the longevity tables, that would seem to make sense. The difficulty there is that people aren't living healthier, from what I can tell. So you're getting situations where people almost enforce retirement, and so on that basis, you have to draw on the pensions, and we put in place a plan, where, to sort of like bridge their retirement, or when they consider retirement to be, up until the state pension. So that's not necessarily a problem as such. One or two, where it does become an issue is sometimes like, I'd say the public sector, because, we can get situations where people are doing manual jobs, just say self-employed builders, and then they have to take on another career. If you get people, we've come across people like paramedics and fire people and police, they have, there's pressure to put up their retirement ages, and yet there's some resistance against that because they physically struggle in some cases to work to the higher age. So that's a problem that's brewing, and I don't know how that's going to be resolved, really.
Well, I know of there has been talk, of course, of having a different age depending on the physicality of the job.
Yeah.
And that seems to me a fairly practical.
Yes.
However, as you know, how controversial that might be, especially in some of the unions. Whether it's practical or not, I don't know. But I think it's something that's certainly going to have to be looked at, and it's going to have to be looked at soon.
Yeah.
Now, looking at Mark, since we've sort of wandered over there anyway, Britain finds itself in a particularly unique political situation at the moment. The government, of course, is promising right now that we will leave the European Union on the 31st of October. I know it's August and it tends to be silly season for politics, but this week, obviously, we've had a collection of opposition MPs suggest that they could form a government of their own. Yeah. And I get the feeling that businesses really just want something to be done one way or the other.
I would agree with that. I mean, I went to, we try and find out as advisors what's happening. So sometimes we go to market reviews or seminars, and there was one I went to, I better not say the name of the company, and they were saying that effectively, I mean, the markets, if anything, we're more comforted by the fact that Britain would be in the EU. I think that was the feeling on the market. But one thing that they did say was the thing that nobody liked was uncertainty. So if there's going to be a lack of investment in the UK, it's going to be, they want to wait, businesses want to find out what's actually happening. And certainly 3 years of not doing anything doesn't encourage companies to come into the UK at all.
Precisely.
And so it needs resolving. I mean, I don't mind saying I voted to stay in, but now...
With very much obviously a minority opinion in Boston.
Yes. Well, I actually live in Lincoln, but that's
there we go.
But yes, it is a minority opinion in Boston. But I did vote to stay in, but now the decision's been made. I just want us to get out, because for a number of reasons. I mean, it's not going to be the same if we did stay in Europe. There's no point having a referendum if it's not going to be carried through. So, I fully support the current strategy. Definitely.
And I think that perhaps some reassuring facts as well is that, since you brought it up, is there has certainly been a slowdown in investment.
Yes.
But it's not gone anywhere else.
No.
It's not gone into Europe, it's not gone overseas. It's people, I think, that are essentially saying, well, look, let's not do this now. We'll find out what's going to happen, and then we can put the pressure back on the accelerator, as it were.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's the hope, I suppose. How, again, from your sector's perspective, Mark, is that genuinely the thought, the fact that just it needs to be over, and if we can pick the 31st of October as that date, then that's sort of good enough?
Yes.
And I really do think that's echoed in so many different industries now at this point, because there's only 3 years is a hell of a long time.
It is. And the other thing that I fully support is, I don't think you can take no deal off the table. I mean, it reminds me of transfer deadline day in football. The amount of transfer deals that go to the 11th hour, because basically it's just trying to get one side agreement with the other. And the idea of taking no deal off the table is just stupid in any negotiation, as far as I can see. But there we are, because the other party. I could use one or two analogies, but I haven't rehearsed them, so it might come out a bit wrong. If you're selling a footballer, for instance, and the other ones know that they're not going to be or they're going to be sold, then you can offer a silly amount, knowing that it's going to be sold. So the whole idea of taking no deal off the table is just ridiculous.
We shall see what happens, but I think it's quite unpredictable at the moment.
Yes.
Now we're sort of coming to the end here, but I would quite like to ask, given we've already talked about education, what is it you would say to young people, especially those looking to go into the sector? What advice would you give to them starting out at the moment?
Starting out in what, as a financial advisor?
Yeah, because I think there's certainly but perhaps even at sort of secondary school level, people that are looking for a career in that sort of arena.
I would say find a firm, get embedded into, and learn as much as you possibly can. I mean, you need to certainly walk before you can run. And there's a strange thing with the sector. I mean, in the past, ages normally dominated it for a number of reasons. One is because of perceived experience. I think people have more likely to sort of, I say trust. I don't know if that's quite the right word. Trust somebody who's been around the block a bit.
Yes.
And so a youngster coming in and sort of dealing with the public is going to be really hard to start with. So I'd say certainly walk before you can run. And we got approached by a client whose son was looking at joining financial services. Yeah, learn, do the exams, find out what's involved. But sort of a key part of the job is actually being able to talk to people, being able to listen to people, understand what they're after, what the priorities are, and that takes time. Inevitably, it takes time.
Don't forget the customers are human.
Yes. So the best university graduates coming in, they'll know all about what's involved, but the actual experience and communication, that just takes time inevitably.
That's what matters. Well, sound advice, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us today.
No, thank you very much.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Mark, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at RJB Financial Services are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, David Blunkett. Lord Blunkett served as Home and Education Secretary in Tony Blair's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2015. Outside of politics, he's the Vice President of the Royal National Institute of Blind People and the National Alzheimer's Society. And when he has the time, he can be found cheering on his team, Sheffield Wednesday. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoy speaking to David. Here it is now.
We're now joined by Lord Blunkett. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Now, it would probably be remiss of me if I didn't start, given the recent events in Parliament. I didn't ask you, given your 32 years in that place, about your thoughts regarding the unprecedented situation I think the public are looking at the minute.
Well, I think I see it very much like Joe Public. I see it as though I'm looking at something that is made up, that is scripted, that is like almost a sci-fi film where anything can happen and then anything does happen. And I'm very sad about that because I think that it's damaged our parliamentary democracy. I think that it's brought politics into disrepute, and I think it's created anger on all sides, whether people were strongly in favour of remaining or whether they were, as we call them, Brexiteers.
Absolutely. And given that situation, whether it's going to be a general election, many people are beginning to worry about how apathy taking effect.
Well, I'm worried about two things. Apathy in the respect of turnout and whether people vote, and anger and, if you like, the friction developed into a failure to be able to have a democratic dialogue, so that the respect that we have for each other, that the way in which we debate issues is often now broken down, and there's abuse in the street, not just of people because they're considered to be different or foreign, but because people recognise they have a different point of view. Now, that is new. I've been around in formal politics now for, goodness, almost all my adult life, because I was elected to a local authority in my city of Sheffield when I was 22. And I've never seen that. I've seen people get very annoyed, and that's fine, and people should get angry, but I've never experienced them display it in such personal venom before. And we need to calm that, because our democracy depends on people being able to have genuine disagreements and differences and to work them through the political process. Otherwise, we fall, as history teaches us, into the hands of extremists.
Absolutely. And given that you've just said what you just said, a lot of people are talking now about whether the party structure, which does exist at the minute, it can survive. We've seen both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party showing signs of buckling.
I think the political system the party system will survive. It may have a very rocky time in the near future, but I think it'll right itself. But it will only do that if political parties themselves sort out what's going on internally. I think both major parties have been, to use an old phrase, infiltrated. Came across a prominent minister just outside the cabinet whose current chair of their Conservative Association was the UKIP candidate against him back in 2015. We know about the challenges within the Labour Party and the way in which people who were thrown out of the party have either been able to or are seeking to rejoin. And so we've got this two-ender, if you like, the bread in the two sides of the sandwich coming together, and the middle is being squeezed. Now, there's academic work to say that actually the electorate aren't all that keen on centre parties, particularly at the moment. And I think we need to be wary of believing that the creation of some sort of centrist party in Britain would solve the problem. It would temporarily, but it wouldn't resolve the differences that people have and how we work them through.
A lot of people have been suggesting recently that the only way out of this situation is with a second referendum. And I'm right in saying that you have quite reluctantly come to that position yourself.
It took me a very long time to come to the conclusion that we would need an affirmative vote. I resisted it because I come from and represented an area deeply disaffected, feeling the effects of deindustrialization and then the austerity measures on the back of the global meltdown, and felt in my bones, which is why I wasn't one of those who thought we were easily going to win the referendum for Remain in 2016, that you need to deal with the underlying problems and causes of that disaffection. And the simple slogan, "They didn't hear you the first time, tell them again," could be very effective, a kind of Trumpian slogan that could be adopted by those who are very, very vehement Brexiteers. However, I think given the state that we're in, I came to the conclusion a few weeks ago, and I wrote in the Daily Telegraph, that I think the only way to deal with this is to get an agreement for this interim period, because that's what it is, a transition from where we are to where we might be, and then put that to the British people. And if the British people don't like that negotiated agreement, either Theresa May's original or something that emerges from the discussions and the debate and the toing and froing between the two major parties, put that to the electorate and give them a chance 3 years on from 2016 to make a new choice as to whether that's what they want to go for, that's the direction they want to take, or whether they'd like to take a step back and remain in the European Union.
And do you think that the people of Sheffield that did vote leave, many of whom voting for the first time in decades or the first time ever, do you think that they would feel maybe slightly frustrated at the call for a second vote?
Yes, I think they would. And I think we just have to be really honest about that. There would be a great deal of frustration, bordering on anger, people saying, we gave you the message, why didn't you just do it? And we have to be straight with them. The reason it's been complex, the reason it's taken this time, the reason that we are in the undoubted mess we're in, is because it wasn't simple. You didn't, as some people thought, sign a bit of paper and walk away. This is a complex, interconnected, economically, socially, in terms of our trade and our relationships, not just within the European Union, but with the European Union's agreements across the world. This is a complex issue. And to pretend otherwise is not to give people what they want. It's to patronize them and say, yes, we don't think you were wrong. We don't think that you got it wrong when you thought it was a simple way out. I think you just have to be straight with them, and they'll be angry. I mean, people are angry with me when I walk around in my old constituency and say, what are you up to? And I say, I'm up to trying to speak the truth. I'm up to trying to say it as it is, as I always have done.
Absolutely. Now, given all of that, one would expect the governing party to perhaps be somewhere between 20 points and to 30 points behind the opinion polls, but they are not. There has been an awful lot of criticism of the leadership of the opposition regarding that. Would you have any advice for the leadership of your party?
Well, I think belatedly, from the beginning of April, the two parties realised that they were going to sink separately if they didn't actually try and make an effort and at least display some endeavour to work together. I think had there been two different leaders post-2016 referendum, this would have happened a great deal earlier. It hasn't, but it can now. And it is remarkable that in the circumstances that the government have found themselves, not just in not being able to get the kind of deal that some people wanted, not even being able to hold all their party together, but actually being totally riven publicly with cabinet responsibility having broken down, to find themselves only marginally behind, or even on opinion polls through March, marginally in front of the Labour Party, is astonishing. And once this period is over, I think Labour will need to take a very long, hard look at why the British people have not turned, as they often do, to what is called Her Majesty's opposition. There are very complex reasons for that, including the fact that the leadership of the party have only realised, I think, very, very recently, that you have to reach out to people whose views you don't agree with, and you have to win them over to something more than what the issues and the policies and the ideology you thought of in the first place.
And on that point, you'll be aware, certainly, that the Parliamentary Review itself has been dedicated to showcasing leadership in all its forms across the country. Now, speaking to many of our contributors, they have made clear that they do feel that leadership has been lacking, both from the government and opposition, as you've said. In your many years in politics, is there a time in certainly recent history where there has been perhaps a leadership vacuum like we're seeing today?
I think we find in Britain an interesting paradox. People want strong leaders, but they want leaders that listen and are responsive. And the two don't always go together. I've lived through the period of both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, two leaders who knew what they wanted to do and were prepared to put it on the line. I've lived through Ted Heath and John Major, who were less clear. Ted Heath on Europe, yes, but not on much else. John Major really trying to mop up after the controversial and divisive Thatcher era, where they showed a different style of leadership. Now, they were portrayed as being weak. I don't think that's always the case. I think that you can have leaders who are very clear what they want to do, but to turn on its head the Marxist slogan, speak softly and walk with a big stick, they can actually do the job clearly and decisively. Clem Attlee was such a person, and in many ways so is Harold Macmillan. And those are the kind of leaders where you don't get bombast, you don't get, I know best and I'm going to push this through, but you actually get someone who can genuinely create a coalition of the willing, but has a clear idea about their values. And I hope we'll return to that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the strengths of the review has always been its sense of bipartisanship.
Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it, and therefore to get the message that they've got to reflect outwards. We need both. We need the input into the system. We need voices. We need ideas. We need experiences through Parliamentary Review inwards, but we also need to ensure that the way in which our politics works is reflected outwards, so that people firstly understand how the system works, secondly, the complexity and difficulty of it, and thirdly, the way in which they need to tell us, I mean, I'm in the upper house now, but to tell us as parliamentarians what they think and where we're going wrong, and for us to listen.
Absolutely. And on that point, you've been in public service for most of your life, Lord Blunkett, ever since Sheffield City Council. I mean, in that time, what are the key lessons you think you've learned in the best way for policymakers and those at the coalface to communicate and work together?
I've learned that actually there is enormous wisdom out there, and if you're prepared to engage and to listen, then your views might actually change. Mine have on a number of issues, particularly social issues, what small L liberal issues over the years, going in the opposite direction, it has to be said, to most people as they age. And you need to ensure that you've reached out to sufficient people to create that coalition that allows you to make progress, and that you won't create everything you want and change everything you want for the better overnight. It will never happen. There's no days yet, though, where everything's done and we can all wash our hands of it. That's fine. We build building blocks. We stand, if you like, historically on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we get that message, we won't be too frustrated when everything doesn't happen immediately, but we'll be determined to make progress, and we'll punish politically, democratically, those who don't.
Absolutely. And perhaps finally, with that concluding point, it's fair to say, as you've already mentioned, a lot of the population are frustrated, no matter how they vote in the referendum or their general political opinions. But perhaps, for those people. Is there something you'd point to be optimistic looking towards the future about?
I think I'm very clear. We're a great nation. We can't just do things on our own. We have to recognize that we live in an incredibly rapidly growing global environment, and the power sources and the power politically has changed over the last 20, 30 years. But we are creative, we are innovative, and we will pull through, and we'll do it because we won't have anyone else to blame anymore if we come out of the European Union, and we'll need to literally pull our socks up and do it ourselves. In the end, my message is clear. Nothing is ever as good as it seems at the time, and nothing is ever as bad. And we've come through difficult times in the past, and we'll come through again.
Lord Blunkett, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Silver Cross to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by guests in each podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guests on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit our website at www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.